I'm Susan, 37 female. I live in a minimalist penthouse overlooking the city, a place I built with code, coffee, and 2 decades of relentless determination. I run a financial technology company that specializes in fraud detection, an irony that is not lost on me. My life is structured, quiet, and successful, the very thing my mother demanded I achieve before I was ever allowed to be part of the family again. 20 years ago, she threw me out with nothing, and now, her entire world is collapsing because of a system I helped create. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The house I grew up in wasn't a home, it was a showroom. My mother, Sarah, was an interior designer with a client list that valued aesthetics over everything else. Our furniture was chosen for its form, not its function. The carpets were too white to walk on, the vases too expensive to hold flowers. Everything was for display, including her children. My younger sister, Olivia, fit perfectly into this world. She was beautiful, charming, and effortlessly mirrored our mother's desire for social perfection. She learned early on that her value was tied to her appearance and her ability to complement the decor. I, on the other hand, was a smudge on the pristine glass. I was awkward, bookish, and more interested in the guts of our desktop computer than the designer clothes our mother insisted we wear. My father had been the buffer, the one person who saw my interest in technology not as a weird phase, but as a future. He'd sneak me books on programming and whisper, "You're going to build worlds, Susie." But he passed away from a sudden heart attack when I was 15, and with him went the only warmth in that cold, curated house. After his death, my mother's obsession with maintaining a flawless image intensified. His life insurance payout wasn't just for security, it was for renovations, a new car, and a grief wardrobe that was featured in a local magazine. Life became a performance, and I was forgetting my lines. The final act of my life in that house began with a letter. It was from a prestigious university, offering me a full scholarship for their computer science program. It wasn't just a scholarship, it was an escape. It was proof that my hours spent hunched over a keyboard learning programming languages from library books meant something. I remember my hands shaking as I held the thick, embossed envelope. For the first time since my dad died, I felt a flicker of real hope. I thought, perhaps foolishly, that this achievement would finally be enough for my mother. Success was what she always talked about. "Success is the only thing that matters," she'd say, adjusting a picture frame. "It's the only thing that silences the critics." I found her in the living room, directing a painter on the exact shade of greige for the accent wall. My sister Olivia was nearby, scrolling through her phone, probably curating her own perfect digital life. I held out the letter. "Mom, I got it," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of excitement and apprehension. She took it from me without looking away from the wall. Her perfectly manicured fingers tore open the seal with an air of detached annoyance, as if it were just another piece of junk mail. She scanned the first few lines, her expression unreadable. Then, a slow, cold smile spread across her face, but it didn't reach her eyes. She handed the letter to Olivia. "Look at this, darling," she said. "Your sister wants to be a computer nerd." Olivia glanced at it, shrugged, and went back to her phone, muttering something about a good filter. I waited for the congratulations, the hug, anything. Instead, my mother turned to me, her voice as crisp and sterile as the room around us. "A scholarship? How quaint. But this is a state university. It has no prestige." I was stunned. "It's one of the best computer science programs in the country," I stammered. "It's a huge opportunity." Sarah sighed, a theatrical display of disappointment. "Susan, we had a plan. You were to attend the private liberal arts college my friend's daughter goes to. You would major in art history, meet a respectable young man from a good family, and we would plan a beautiful wedding." This was the first I was hearing of this plan. My future had been designed, just like one of her living rooms, and my dreams had no place in it. "I don't want to study art history," I said, my voice gaining a bit of strength. "I want to build software. This scholarship is my chance to do that without costing you a thing." The moment I said "costing you," her eyes narrowed. To her, everything was a transaction, a measure of investment and return. She saw my passion not as a gift, but as a liability. "It will cost me my reputation," she snapped. "My daughter a technician. W. How will I tell the ladies at the club that you're fixing computers in some basement?" The argument escalated quickly. I told her it was my life, my future. She told me I was ungrateful and selfish. Olivia chimed in, accusing me of embarrassing them. The fight reached its peak when my mother delivered her ultimatum. "You have two choices," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "You can decline this ridiculous offer and follow the path I have laid out for you, or you can take your scholarship and get out. If you choose that computer screen over this family, then you are no longer a part of it." I looked at her, then at my sister, who was now watching with a smirk. There was no love in their eyes, only judgment. They weren't offering me a choice, they were offering me a cage. In that moment, something inside me broke, but it was replaced by a cold, hard clarity. These people, this house, it was never a home. It was a stage, and I was done playing my part. "Fine," I whispered, the word tasting like freedom and ash. "I'll take the scholarship." My mother's face hardened into a marble mask. She didn't shout, she didn't cry. She simply nodded as if closing a business deal. "Then you're dead to this family," she said, each word a perfectly placed, devastating blow. "Don't come back without success, the kind of success that we can recognize." I knew what she meant. She didn't mean happiness or fulfillment. She meant money, power, and prestige, the only currency she understood. That evening, I packed a small bag with my clothes, my programming books, and a faded picture of my dad. I had no idea where I would go, but I knew I could never stay. The front door clicked shut behind me, a sound that echoed the closing of a chapter, the slamming of a door on my entire childhood. The air was cold that night, sharp enough to feel like a physical slap. The click of the front door was so final, so absolute. I stood on the perfectly manicured lawn for a moment, half expecting the door to swing open, for my mother to appear with a flicker of regret in her eyes. But there was only silence, the house a silent, illuminated fortress of indifference. I clutched the single duffel bag to my chest and started walking, with no destination in mind. I was 17, legally still a child, but in the span of a 10-minute argument, I had been rendered an orphan. My only plan was to survive until my university orientation, which was still 3 weeks away. I had about $53 in my wallet, money saved from odd jobs. My first thought was to call my aunt, my father's sister. She had always been kind to me, though my mother kept her at a distance, deeming her unrefined. I found a payphone. This was an era before every teenager had a cell phone, and dialed her number, my fingers clumsy with cold. She picked up on the third ring. I explained the situation in a choked voice, the words tumbling out in a rush of panic and humiliation. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, honey," she finally said, her voice strained. "Sarah already called me. She told me her side of it, that you were being rebellious, that you said some terrible things." My heart sank. My mother had moved faster than I had, preemptively poisoning the well. "That's not what happened," I pleaded. "She gave me an ultimatum. She threw me out." Another pause. "Look, Susan," my aunt said, and I could hear the discomfort in her tone. "I can't get in the middle of this. Sarah is my sister-in-law. It's family. I'm sure this will all blow over. Why don't you go back and apologize?" Apologize? The word hung in the air, absurd and insulting. Apologize for wanting a future, for accepting a scholarship I had earned? I realized then that my mother's influence extended far beyond the walls of her house. She controlled the family narrative, and in her story, I was the villain. I mumbled a goodbye and hung up the phone, the receiver feeling heavy and cold. The first door I had knocked on had been slammed shut. My own family had disowned me with a single, coordinated phone call. The feeling of betrayal was a physical ache, a hollowness that spread through my chest. I spent the first night huddled in the waiting room of a 24-hour bus station, trying to look like I was waiting for a bus that was never going to arrive. Every time a security guard passed, my heart pounded. I looked like what I was, a runaway. I was scared, hungry, and overwhelmingly alone. The next day, I knew I needed a plan. My scholarship covered tuition and a dorm room, but the dorms wouldn't open for another 3 weeks. I needed a place to stay and a way to earn money for food. I remembered a small, all-night diner a few miles away, a place my dad used to take me for milkshakes. It was called the Corner Booth. It felt like a relic from a kinder time. With my bag slung over my shoulder, I walked there. The diner was warm and smelled of coffee and frying bacon. A woman with kind eyes and a tired smile was wiping down the counter. Her name tag read Sophia. I approached her timidly and asked if they were hiring. I must have looked a sight, exhausted, pale, and clutching my bag like a life raft. She looked me over, her gaze softening. "What kind of work you looking for, kid?" she asked. "Anything," I said honestly. "Washing dishes, clearing tables, I'll do anything." Sophia studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I can give you some hours washing dishes. It's minimum wage, under the table for now. You got a place to stay?" I hesitated, the shame burning my cheeks. "I'm figuring that out," I mumbled. Sophia seemed to understand everything I wasn't saying. She pointed to a small, worn-out armchair in the corner of her tiny office. "You can sleep there for a few nights until you get on your feet," she said. "But you work hard, you hear me? No slacking." I could have hugged her. That small, lumpy armchair felt like the most luxurious bed in the world. For the next 3 weeks, that diner became my sanctuary. I worked from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., the steam from the industrial dishwasher fogging up my glasses. During the day, I'd go to the public library. It was there I met Jacob, the head librarian. He was an older man with a calm demeanor and a love for books that bordered on reverence. He never asked why a teenage girl was spending 8 hours a day in his library, but he would often leave a cup of tea and a biscuit on the table where I worked. One afternoon, about a week after I'd left home, I made one last, desperate attempt to reconnect. I used a library computer to email Olivia. I poured my heart out, explaining how scared I was, how much I missed our dad, and how I wished she could understand. I told her I wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. I was just trying to build a life for myself. I hit send with a prayer. Her reply came 2 days later. It was short and brutal. "Mom is redecorating your room." She said it was time to turn it into a proper guest room. "Everyone thinks you're being dramatic. You made your choice, Susan. Deal with it." Attached to the email was a picture. It was of my room, but it was already half empty. My posters were torn down, my books gone from the shelves. In the corner, my mother and Olivia were smiling for the camera, holding up a paint swatch. They weren't just erasing me from their lives, they were erasing any evidence I had ever existed. That email was the final, definitive betrayal. It wasn't just my mother, it was my sister, too. They were a united front. The image of them smiling in my dismantled room burned itself into my memory. It was the moment the hurt curdled into something else, something harder and more resolute. They didn't just lock me out, they celebrated my absence. They were dancing on the grave of my childhood. I closed the email, took a deep breath, and turned back to the programming manual Jacob had left for me. My family was gone. Fine. I would build a new world for myself, a world where I didn't need their approval, their home, or their love. And I would succeed on a scale they couldn't possibly imagine. Their betrayal wouldn't be the end of my story. It would be the fuel. 20 years is a long time. It's long enough to build a company from nothing, to see it grow from a few lines of code written in a cramped dorm room to a multi-million-dollar enterprise headquartered in a skyscraper. It's long enough for the sharp edges of grief and betrayal to dull, replaced by the persistent hum of ambition. I hadn't spoken to my mother or sister since that final, cutting email from Olivia. I changed my phone number when I left for college and never looked back. I learned about their lives through the digital breadcrumbs they left online. Olivia's vapid social media presence, showcasing a life of sponsored trips and designer handbags, and my mother's occasional features in local lifestyle magazines, posing in yet another impeccably designed, soulless room. They seemed to be thriving in the world of appearances they cherished so much. I, too, had succeeded, but on my own terms. My company, Veritas Financial, developed cutting-edge software that used machine learning to detect and prevent large-scale financial fraud. We worked with banks, investment firms, and government agencies. I was the Susan who had built something real, something that protected people from the kind of deception that hides behind a veneer of respectability. I was proud of what I had accomplished, but a part of me always felt like I was still that 17-year-old girl trying to prove she was worth something. The success my mother had demanded was mine, but I had no desire to present it to her for approval. The discovery came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in a quarterly review meeting with my top data analysts, looking at a projection of emerging fraud patterns. My lead analyst, a brilliant young woman named Chloe, flagged a cluster of unusual activity originating from a small boutique investment firm called Prestige Wealth Management. The algorithm is flagging this as a potential Ponzi scheme, she said, pointing to a complex chart on the screen. It's small scale, but the markers are all there: unusually consistent high returns, vague investment strategies, and a rapid influx of new investors drawn from a close-knit social circle. This was exactly the kind of fraud my software was designed to catch. These schemes preyed on trust, using social connections to create a false sense of security before collapsing and wiping out the savings of everyone involved. "Pull up the principal officers of the firm," I said, leaning forward. My job was mostly administrative these days, but I still loved digging into the data. Chloe typed a few commands, and a list of names and photos appeared on the screen. The CEO was a man I didn't recognize, but the head of client relations was a name that made the air leave my lungs. Sarah, my mother. It couldn't be. I squinted at the screen. The professional headshot was airbrushed and flattering, but there was no mistaking her. The same cold smile, the same eyes that assessed everything for its value. Her bio was a masterpiece of fiction, describing her as a seasoned investment liaison with deep roots in the community's financial elite, leveraging her interior design career to build a network of high-net-worth individuals. It was all nonsense, of course. She knew how to sell a lifestyle, not an investment portfolio. A cold dread mixed with a strange, vindictive curiosity washed over me. I kept my expression neutral, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "And the other investors?" I asked, my voice steady. "Can we see the list of clients?" Chloe, unaware of the bombshell she had just dropped, pulled up another file. It was a long list of names, many of whom I vaguely recognized from my mother's social circle: doctors, lawyers, local business owners. And then, near the top, was another name: Olivia. My sister. She was listed not just as an investor, but as a promotional partner, likely using her social media influence to lure her followers into the scheme. A quick search of her profile confirmed it. There were posts of her on a yacht, captioned, "Living the dream thanks to Prestige Wealth Management. Ask me how?" She was selling a fantasy, and my mother was the architect. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't just my mother working for a fraudulent company. She was at the heart of it, using her social credibility as bait. She and this firm were targeting people they knew, people who trusted them, and were likely draining their life savings to fund their own lavish lifestyles. The irony was suffocating. My life's work was to stop people like her. For 20 years, I had poured my soul into creating a system of truth and transparency in a world of financial lies. And the ultimate test of that system was my own family. After the meeting, I locked myself in my office, the city lights twinkling below. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a movie. The hurt 17-year-old girl was screaming inside me, but the 37-year-old CEO knew what had to be done. This was bigger than my personal history. Real people were about to lose everything. My mother had once accused me of embarrassing the family. Now, she and my sister were on the verge of becoming notorious criminals. I had a choice. I could ignore it, pretend I hadn't seen it, and let them eventually get caught by someone else. Or I could intervene. I could ensure that the system I built would work as intended, without fear or favor. I pulled up the case file for Prestige Wealth Management on my private terminal. I had access to a level of data my analysts didn't. I could see the flow of money, the shell corporations, the falsified statements. It was an elegant, vicious scheme, and I was the one person in the world who could not only see all of it, but also had a deeply personal stake in its outcome. My mother had told me to come back with success. I never did. But now, my success was coming for her. The echo from the past wasn't a cry for help. It was the sound of a ticking bomb, and my finger was on the button to disarm it, even if it meant blowing up what was left of my family for good. I began to quietly and methodically gather the evidence. The days that followed were a masterclass in compartmentalization. By day, I was Susan, the CEO, attending meetings, approving budgets, and guiding the strategic direction of my company. By night, I was an obsessive, anonymous investigator, diving headfirst into the digital rabbit hole of prestige wealth management. I couldn't delegate this. My involvement had to remain an absolute secret. If word ever got out that the CEO of Veritas Financial had a personal connection to a fraud investigation, it could compromise the case and damage my company's reputation for impartiality. So, I woe. Arquette alone, fueled by black coffee and a cold, burning sense of purpose. My first step was to create a firewalled, untraceable workspace on my home network. From there, I used the proprietary tools I had developed to map out the entire financial ecosystem of the scheme. It was both sloppier and more brazen than I had initially thought. My mother, Sarah, wasn't just the head of client relations. Her name was on the initial incorporation documents of several shell companies used to launder the money. She was a founder, a key player. She had used my father's remaining inheritance, the money that should have been for our future, as seed capital to get the fraudulent enterprise off the ground. She had gambled my past to fund her criminal present. The discovery felt like a fresh betrayal, a desecration of my father's memory. Olivia's role was just as insidious. She was the public face, the influencer who made fraud look glamorous. I scrolled through years of her social media posts, my stomach twisting with disgust. There were pictures of her with a new luxury car, captioned investment goals. A trip to Paris, paid for by smart financial planning. She was selling a lie to thousands of followers, many of whom were young and impressionable, encouraging them to invest their modest savings into her mother's scheme. One post particularly stood out. It was a picture of her and my mother, clinking champagne glasses in a ridiculously opulent room. The caption read, "Building our empire together? So proud of my brilliant mom who taught me that strong women build their own success." The hypocrisy was staggering. They were building an empire on sand, on the stolen dreams of others. To gather unimpeachable evidence, I needed more than just digital footprints. I needed inside information. I thought of Jacob, the kind librarian who had been a quiet anchor for me all those years ago. He had retired, but we'd kept in touch, exchanging emails and Christmas cards. He was one of the few people who knew the truth about my past. Jacob was a man of quiet integrity, and his mind was as sharp as ever. I called him, ostensibly just to catch up. After some pleasantries, I steered the conversation carefully. "Jacob," I said, "I'm working on a sensitive side project, a pro bono case. It involves some people from our old hometown. I was wondering if you still had connections at the local courthouse or records office." Jacob was shrewd. He heard the tension in my voice. "Is this about your family, Susan?" he asked gently. I hesitated for a fraction of a second before telling him the truth. He listened patiently as I laid out the details of the fraud, my voice clinical and detached. When I finished, there was a long silence. "The woman who locked her own daughter out of the house," he said, his voice laced with a quiet anger I'd never heard from him before. "I'm not surprised she ended up a thief. What do you need?" Jacob became my discreet, invaluable ally. He was a master of public records. He spent days at the county clerk's office, digging up property deeds, loan agreements, and business licenses. He uncovered a pattern. My mother and her partners would convince clients to liquidate their assets, often encouraging them to take out second mortgages on their homes to invest in the scheme. They were bleeding people dry. The evidence mounted into an undeniable mountain of deceit. I compiled everything into a secure digital file. Bank transfers, falsified account statements I was able to reconstruct, Olivia's social media posts cross-referenced with investment dates, and the public records Jacob had unearthed. The final piece of the puzzle was understanding the scope of the victim pool. Using a non-company affiliated data analysis tool, I anonymously scraped the social media networks of my mother and sister's contacts. I built a social graph, identifying dozens of individuals who had publicly praised Prestige Wealth Management. I then cross-referenced their names with public property and financial records. The picture was devastating. I found a retired teacher who had invested her entire pension. A young couple who had put in the money they'd saved for a down payment on a house. These were real people, their faces smiling in their profile pictures, completely unaware that their futures were being systematically dismantled. One night, I found something that made me feel physically ill. One of the investors was the husband of Sophia, the diner owner who had taken me in when I had nowhere else to go. They had invested a significant portion of their retirement savings, the money earned from decades of flipping pancakes and pouring coffee. My mother, who had never worked a day of hard labor in her life, was stealing from the woman who had shown her abandoned daughter more kindness in a single night than she had in 17 years. That was the moment the investigation ceased to be about my past or my pain. It became about justice. It was a boo. Protecting the Sophias and Jacobs of the world from the Sarahs and Olivias. The paper trail was complete. It was a clear, damning, and irrefutable story of greed and betrayal. Now, all I had to do was decide how to deliver it. With the investigation complete, the evidence was a loaded gun sitting on my virtual desk. I had the power to detonate my mother's and sister's lives with a single anonymous email to the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. For a moment, I considered that path, a simple, clean, and distant act of retribution, but it felt incomplete. An anonymous tip would eventually lead to an investigation, but it lacked the personal sting of justice. It would let them believe they were brought down by a faceless system, by bad luck. They would never know that the daughter they had discarded, the computer nerd they had mocked, was the architect of their downfall. They needed to understand that their ruin wasn't an accident, it was a consequence delivered by me. My plan began to form, not as a single act of revenge, but as a carefully orchestrated sequence of events designed for maximum impact and poetic justice. I wasn't just going to expose them, I was going to use the very system they had exploited to dismantle their world, piece by piece. My first move was strategic and deeply personal. I needed to protect the victims, especially Sophia and her husband. A sudden SEC raid could freeze all the assets, including the stolen money, potentially trapping it in years of legal battles. I wanted to give the victims a chance to get out before the whole thing imploded. This was where my company's resources came into play, albeit indirectly. I created a separate, anonymous entity, a financial blog called The Watchdog Investor. Over the course of a week, I published a series of meticulously researched articles about the warning signs of Ponzi schemes, using hypothetical examples that mirrored Prestige Wealth Management's structure almost exactly. I wrote about affinity fraud, where scammers exploit tight-knit communities. I explained how to spot falsified statements and guaranteed high returns. Then, I used targeted social media advertising, aiming the ads directly at people in my hometown who were in my mother's and sister's social orbit. The ads were subtle, with headlines like, "Is your retirement safe?" and "The 5 red flags your investment manager hopes you'll ignore." The blog was completely untraceable to me or my company, a ghost in the machine. The goal was to plant a seed of doubt. I couldn't warn people directly, but I could give them the tools to discover the truth for themselves. The analytics on the blog showed a spike in traffic from my hometown. People were reading. They were getting nervous. A few days later, Jacob confirmed through local gossip that whispers had started. A couple of investors had tried to pull their money out, and Prestige Wealth Management had given them excuses, citing market volatility and processing delays, classic Ponzi scheme tactics to stop a bank run. The panic was beginning to simmer. With the victims alerted, it was time for the next phase. I packaged my entire investigation, the bank records, the shell company documents, Olivia's social media evidence, everything, into an encrypted file. I didn't send it to the SEC. Instead, I sent it to a journalist I knew, a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter at a major national newspaper known for his relentless pursuit of financial crimes. I had been a confidential source for him on a previous story, and he trusted my information implicitly. I sent the file from a secure, one-time-use email address with a simple message. This is one of the cleanest Ponzi cases you will ever see. The human interest angle is a mother-daughter team who scammed their own community. All evidence is verified. You have the exclusive. Handing it to a journalist instead of law enforcement served a dual purpose. First, a high-profile newspaper investigation would create a public firestorm that regulators couldn't ignore, accelerating the legal process. Second, and more importantly, it would ensure that the story was told. My mother and sister's faces would be on the front page. Their carefully constructed image of success and prestige would be publicly and permanently shattered. They cared more about their reputation than anything else. I was going to make sure their crime was their only legacy. The final piece of the plan was the most personal. Among the assets Jacob had uncovered was the fact that my mother's showroom of a house, my childhood home, was heavily leveraged. She had taken out a massive second mortgage to pour into the scheme, confident that her fraudulent returns would cover it. The loan was held by a large national bank that happened to be one of my company's biggest clients. The bank used our Veritas software to monitor their loan portfolios for risk. I knew that when the news of the fraud broke, there would instantly be flagged as a high-risk borrower. The bank's automated protocols my software managed, would trigger an immediate default and foreclosure process. The house she chose over me, the symbol of her shallow values, would be seized. And it would happen not because I made a call, but because the systems of logic and consequence I had built into the world would operate exactly as designed. I had set all the pieces in motion: the anonymous blog to warn the victims, the explosive story handed to a top reporter, the inevitable financial collapse that my own work would automate. I had done it all from the quiet of my penthouse office, a silent partner in their destruction. Now, all I had to do was wait for the dominoes to fall. The payback wasn't going to be a loud, angry confrontation. It was going to be the quiet, inexorable hum of a machine I had built, calmly and logically erasing them from the world of success they so desperately wanted to inhabit. The story broke on a Thursday. The headline on the front page of the newspaper's website was stark and brutal. The high society swindle: mother-daughter duo bilk millions from friends and neighbors in lavish Ponzi scheme. Beneath it was my mother's airbrushed corporate headshot next to a candid photo of Olivia sipping a cocktail on a yacht, pulled from her social media. The article was a devastating, detailed account of their fraud, laying out the evidence I had compiled with chilling precision. The reporter had done his job flawlessly, interviewing anonymous victims who spoke of their trust being shattered and their life savings vanishing. My name was nowhere in it. I was a ghost. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The SEC announced a formal investigation that same morning. The U.S. Attorney's Office followed suit within hours. By lunchtime, news vans were parked outside Prestige Wealth Management's office and, more satisfyingly, on the perfectly manicured lawn of my old house. I watched the live news feed from my office, a strange calm settling over me. My mother, Sarah, was filmed trying to leave her house, shielding her face with a designer handbag as reporters shouted questions. She looked small and frantic, her mask of cool superiority completely gone. Olivia had already deleted all her social media accounts, but the internet never forgets. Screenshots of her bragging about her fraudulent wealth were everywhere. Her influencer career was over. The legal process moved with surprising speed, largely because the evidence was so overwhelming. They were arrested and charged with multiple counts of wire fraud, mail fraud, and money laundering. Their assets were frozen, and they were forced to rely on a public defender. The friends they had scammed became the prosecution's star witnesses. Their entire social world, the foundation of their identity, had turned against them. The trial was the talk of the town, a spectacle of local high society's dirty laundry being aired for all to see. I never attended in person, but but I followed the proceedings through court transcripts and news reports. I read the victim impact statements, my heart aching for the people they had harmed, especially for Sophia, who wrote about how she and her husband might have to sell their diner. The confrontation I had been waiting for wasn't a shouting match or a tearful reunion. It was their sentencing hearing. This I had to see for myself. I didn't go as Susan, the tech CEO. I wore a simple dress, tied my hair back, and put on a pair of non-prescription glasses. I slipped into the back of the public gallery, just another anonymous face in the crowd. From my vantage point, I could see my mother and sister at the defendant's table. They looked like strangers. My mother's perfectly coiffed hair was limp, her expensive suit replaced by a cheap-looking blouse. She looked her age, tired, worn, and defeated. Olivia was next to her, pale and trembling, looking like a lost child. All the glamour and confidence had been stripped away, leaving behind two scared, broken people. They both chose to speak before the judge delivered the sentence. Olivia went first, crying hysterically as she read a prepared statement. She claimed she didn't understand the complexities of the investments and that she was manipulated by her mother and the firm's CEO. She was playing the victim, a role she had perfected her whole life. It was a pathetic, self-serving performance. Then it was my mother's turn. She stood up, her hands shaking as she held a piece of paper. She spoke about her shame, her regret. She talked about wanting to provide a good life for her family and making terrible mistakes. She cried, not the controlled, theatrical tears I remembered, but ugly, ragged sobs of pure despair. And then she looked out at the gallery. For a heart-stopping moment, her eyes swept across the back row and met mine. I didn't flinch. I just looked back at her, my expression completely neutral. There was a flicker of confusion in her eyes, then a dawning, horrified recognition. The blood drained from her face. In that single, silent moment, she knew. She didn't know how, but she knew that I was connected to this. The daughter she had thrown away, the one she had deemed a failure, was sitting in the back of a courtroom watching her life end. The paper trembled in her hand, and she faltered, unable to speak. The carefully rehearsed apology died on her lips. All the lies, all the performances, fell away, and all that was left was the raw, ugly truth of what she had done, staring back at her from across the room. The judge was unmoved by their pleas. He spoke of the profound betrayal they had inflicted on their community, on the friends who had trusted them. He sentenced the CEO of the firm to 15 years. Then he turned to my family. Olivia, due to her lesser role, received a sentence of 5 years in federal prison. My mother, as a key architect of the scheme, was sentenced to 10 years. The sound of the gavel falling was crisp and final. It was the sound of justice. As bailiffs led them away, my mother looked back at me one last time, her face a mask of utter devastation and disbelief. I felt no triumph, no joy, just a quiet, hollow sense of closure. The house of cards they had built had finally collapsed. The door that had been slammed in my face 20 years ago had led me here, to this moment. I had my success, and they had their consequences. I stood up and walked out of the courtroom, not looking back. The months following the sentencing were quiet. The news cycle moved on, and my mother and sister became yesterday's villains. Their names faded from the headlines, reduced to a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. My life, however, continued its upward trajectory. Veritas Financial landed its biggest contract yet. I was featured in a business magazine, hailed as a visionary in the tech world. It was the kind of public success my mother had always craved, the kind she demanded I achieve. The irony was a constant, low hum in the background of my life. I made one final, anonymous move. Through a charitable foundation I had established, I made a series of donations to a victims' compensation fund that had been set up for the people scammed by Prestige Wealth Management. I made sure the largest sum went to Sophia and her husband, enough for them to save their diner and retire comfortably. They would never know where the money came from, and that was exactly how I wanted it. It was a debt paid, a kindness returned. It was the closing of a circle that had begun on a cold night in a diner office 20 years ago. Then, about a year after the trial, the calls started. My mother had been released early on parole due to prison overcrowding and good behavior. The 10-year sentence had been reduced to just over a year served. Olivia was still inside. My mother was out, but she had nothing. The house was long gone, sold at auction. Her friends had abandoned her. Her name was toxic. I learned through Jacob, who still heard the local gossip, that she was living in a cheap, run-down motel on the edge of town. The kind of place with peeling paint and weekly rates. I don't know how she got my number. It was my private cell, a number known only to a handful of close friends and colleagues. She must have gone to extraordinary lengths to find it. The first time she called, an unknown number flashed on my screen. I answered, my voice professional and cautious. "Hello?" There was a pause, and then a raspy, hesitant voice I barely recognized whispered, "Susie, is that you?" It was my mother. I froze, the phone feeling like a block of ice in my hand. I didn't say anything. "Susie, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "I need help. I have nothing. Please just send a little money." I ended the call without a word. But she kept calling. Every day, sometimes twice a day. The calls always came from a blocked number. I never answered again, but she would leave voicemails, each one more desperate than the last. They were rambling, pathetic pleas. She whispered about the cold, the hunger, the shame. She talked about how sorry she was, how she made a terrible mistake. She would say, "You're successful now. You have so much, I'm still your mother." Her words were a ghost from a past I had buried. The mother who had thrown a 17-year-old girl out into the street with $53 was now begging that same girl for a handout. The woman who had valued money and image above all else had lost both, and was now appealing to a love she had never shown. I listened to each message, my expression unreadable. Part of me, a small, wounded part, felt a flicker of pity, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of her smiling as she tore down my room, of Sophia's name on that victim list, of my father's legacy being used to fuel a crime. Her pleas weren't about love or remorse, they were about survival. She was a transactional person, and this was just another transaction. She was reaching out to the only asset she had left. Today, another voicemail arrived. I listened to it on my office speakerphone as I looked out over the city I now called home. "Susan, please," she whispered, her voice weak. "I'm so sorry. I know I was wrong. I was so proud of you even then. I just wanted you to be strong. Please, can't you find it in your heart to forgive me? Just a little money for food." Her voice trailed off into a quiet sob. "I just wanted you to be strong." The lie was so audacious, so perfectly in character that I almost laughed. She didn't want me to be strong, she wanted me to be obedient. I had become strong not because of her, but in spite of her. My finger hovered over the delete button. For 20 years, her voice had been a ghost in my head, whispering that I wasn't good enough. Now, her actual voice was a whisper in my phone, begging for my help. I thought about her ultimatum, "Don't come back without success." I had achieved it. And now she had come back to me with nothing. I had a choice. I could send her money, putting a bandage on a wound that would never heal, or I could give her the one thing she had given me, silence. The one thing that would finally, truly, set me free. I took a deep breath. Today, I didn't just delete the message. I blocked her number. The phone call I never answered became the last one she could ever make. The silence that followed was the sweetest success of all.